welcome everyone to Imagine Museum and our conversation with two artists whose imaginations came together to create this Blue Madonna installation by combining Mr. Helnwein's series, Madonna Blue, and Ms. Duggan's series, The Faces of Mary, now being shown at the museum. And I'm Jane Buckman, the Executive Director of the museum, and we are pleased that you could join us today for this remarkable conversation between Gottfried Helnwein and Trish Duggan. So to begin and to talk a little bit about this new exhibition, the definition for the word Madonna is an idealized, virtuous, and beautiful woman. This is where we begin our journey with the artist talking to us today. Throughout our known history, society has continually overlooked and marginalized women's contributions to mankind's spiritual growth. I'm sure you recognize that, Gottfried. But despite seemingly insurmountable barriers, women have continued to make remarkable achievements in the arts, science, philosophy, theology, and politics. The exhibit of Gottfried Helnwein's Madonna Blue series of paintings and Trish Duggan's The Faces of Mary sculptures draw attention to the transcendent contributions of women and the spiritual value of femininity within our society. And with that small intro, now I want to introduce you to Gottfried Helnwein. It's going to be brief, and I'm certain that I cannot cover everything that you've done in your remarkable career, Gottfried, but I'm going to let you describe a lot of that as we go through this conversation. Gottfried is an Austrian-Irish contemporary visual artist, best known for photorealistic painting of what is described as thought-provoking, some might say unsettling subject matter. He is a painter, a draftsman, photographer, muralist, sculptor, installation, and large-scale performing artist, well recognized for his thought-provoking work and his remarkable career that expands the globe. Gottfried's work centers on psychological and sociological anxiety, historical issues, and political themes, topics which often deem his work as provocative and or controversial. And now to introduce Trish Duggan. Trish has a passion for the arts. And what you're seeing on the screen here are just to accentuate how remarkable that Gottfried's career has been and the different people and what they've had to say about his work. Moving on to Trish Duggan, Trish has a passion for the arts. She also is a successful businesswoman who has greatly contributed to many causes across the world, especially to those causes that benefit children. She herself is raising 6 adopted children and cares very deeply about education in the arts and where children are free to imagine and find their own personal voice through their art making. She is an artist in her own right, creating glass sculpture and installations, along with woodblock prints. Along with these accomplishments, she also is the founder of Imagine Museum. Since founding the museum, Trish has also taken delight in collaborating with many of the artists whose works are in our collection, which is permanently loaned to the museum for this exhibition. The collaborations with Italian maestro Lino Tagliapietra and Sweden's own Bertil Wallin are currently on view in the museum. However, the one installation that is one of the favorites with so many of our guests, not to collaboration, is called Nirvana, that is made up of the 1,000 Buddha glass heads. Natalia, you want to run that video?
This is the glass Buddha wall, and I'm Trish Duggan at the Imagine Museum. This installation has particular significance to me. I studied in Japan and heard a rumor that if you made 1,000 Buddhas, you had a great chance of going to nirvana. So it's just a little hint. But the Buddha did have a famous quote. It's, though you could conquer 1,000 men in battle 1,000 times, the one who conquers himself, his reactivity, his hatred, his prejudice, is the noblest victor of all. This is my installation.
Just short bios for the both of you, not to at all really get into any kind of depth about all of the contributions you both have made to creativity and inspiring people around the globe. So to start this conversation, how long have you two known each other? Trish and Gottfried, how long have you known each other?
I think it goes years back. I don't know exactly when we met the first time. I mean, since a long time, I lived part of my year in Florida. My kids grew up there, so I'm half in Europe, half in Florida. And since many years, I don't even know when it started. But I always admired Trish for her enormous energy. I mean, she is so productive and creative, and she thinks big. I've seldom seen somebody who thinks so big. You know, she starts one museum after the other, creates art, works with lots of artists, is a patron of the art, a collector. So it's really, she's a Renaissance woman. So that's actually something that we know from the Renaissance, from the Medici. And she is actually, I would say, a Medici of female Medici of our days, and an artist, great artist. So it's really a pleasure to work with her, and I love her.
That's fantastic. And Trish, do you remember when you first met Gottfried?
You know, I can say that I don't, because we've known each other for quite a many years. And I visited he and his lovely wife after I met them in Florida. I visited them at their fabulous and magical castle in Ireland. Michael Jackson, Sting, other exciting people have also visited there. And his wife is so spirited and so lovely and such a wonderful hostess. And she and Gottfried are such an outgoing and inclusive couple. And they would have parties including all the local farmers, all their neighbors, the local pub owners, the local musicians, the local poets. And they put on the most unusual parties where we just would tell stories. Everybody got a turn to tell a story or sing a song, and it was just fabulous conversation. So I have enjoyed knowing this amazing couple, and I've actually been so inspired by Gottfried's art that I want to tell a quick story. I was at the castle one time, and he had the most fabulous blue series I'd ever seen. And the next year I thought, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to buy at least one of those. And I came and they were all gone. Oh my God, I couldn't even believe it. And I said, what happened to all these beautiful blue paintings? Sold out. They were all gone. And I'd gone to Art Basel and seen one of his paintings there for just a tremendous sum of money. And I thought, I sold all of these. This is too shocking. So I thought, now what am I going to do? I have to think of something. So I thought, oh, I wonder if he would do for me a blue series of all the iconic and famous women that we see and recognize, you know, when we visit museums or we read art books. And I thought, I wonder if I could talk him into this. And one of my favorite pieces of art, and I'm sure you all remember that there's some piece of art that you saw in a museum or a book one time that you thought, oh my God, this is so unbelievably spectacular. Well, that happened to me in 1964. I was just a child. My mom took me all the way to Chicago from California, and I saw the Pieta that had come from the Vatican. And it was so stunning. I'll never forget that face of Mother Mary. It was in a black room. It seemed like it was black velvet. The whole room was black. The lights were on this marble. It was like alive. I was just speechless when I saw this piece of art, and that will never leave my memory. It was so beautiful. So I talked to Gottfried and I said, would you consider doing a blue series, another one, and it would just be all beautiful women, including the face of Mother Mary. And then later I thought, oh, I asked him and he said yes. Oh, I felt like the luckiest person in the universe, because he decided he answered me that he would do it, and that was to do the Pieta in blue. And this exhibit is so outstanding. Nobody can miss this one. This is just so fantastic, and it will be the highlight of my international museum when I put it together. So I really want to thank Gottfried. I'm so grateful in my life that I came across Gottfried Helnwein. How lucky I am. And now we've done this beautiful collaboration. So I want to thank you very much, Gottfried.
So Gottfried,
Thank you.
Trish asked you about doing this blue series for her of these women. And given that you've done many portraits throughout your career, and really either in a response to or to invoke or provoke maybe a response. So when Trish asked you this question, I'm curious, in your mind, what were you thinking?
Actually, I was working in the past on portraits of versions of the great masters, like the Renaissance masters. I've done some of the pieces. And so it was not something new for me. It was just going back to that theme and create a whole cycle with, I don't even know how many pieces there are. So it's a whole cycle, and it's a big Gesamtkunstwerk. There's no English word for that German expression, Gesamtkunstwerk. So it's something I've started in the early 80s. I've started with blue monochromatic paintings. And the central theme of my work was always girls. So when I started to paint in the early, like end of the 60s, 1969, I painted my first painting. The entrance point to become an artist, to my art, was really the child, because I was born in Vienna right after the war. And as a kid, I realized that something must have happened really bad. I didn't know, nobody talked to me, nobody explained, but I had a feeling as a kid that I was born in hell. I thought everything is so dark, so depressed, so sad, and I didn't know. What I didn't know at that time was that my parents' generation was just losing the Second World War. They were responsible, more or less, for the Holocaust, for the killing of almost 6 million people. So when I was born, there was a total silence. It was so dark. People were so depressed. And then I was always curious. I wanted to know what happened. I asked questions. I was very insistent as a child. But I never got an answer because people were not able to articulate and speak about it. It was so there was a collective amnesia. Nobody wanted to remember the past. So I wanted to learn how to write and read so that I could read the newspapers because I wanted to know what's going on. And it was the time that in the 60s, Austria and Germany could have their own justice system dealing with the war criminals. To my surprise, the most horrible monsters that have killed thousands of people were actually acquitted. So they were all acquitted. They just went home. People celebrated in the street. And that was for me a moment when I broke with that society, with the tradition of my parents. And I think this was also one of the reasons why in Europe, this youth revolution in the 60s broke out. And also in America, it was a revolution against the corruption, against the oppression of the failures of the former generation. But for me, it was also beginning in a quest, in a research, because I didn't understand how people could be so cruel to somebody who is defenseless. You know? It's mainly children and women who are the victims of all the wars, of all the campaigns. Don't forget witch hunts over hundreds of years. It was women that were tortured and killed. So there's a constant war since beginning of mankind against women and children. So in my research about history of violence, I ended up with the image of the female child, girl. And that became actually the beginning of my work. When I decided, that was the reason why I decided to become an artist. It was not so much an aesthetic reason. It was a humanitarian reason. I had so many questions that I couldn't answer, I couldn't articulate, I didn't know how to talk to people about it, so I painted it. So I realized when I started using art to communicate that, with visuals, with pictures, suddenly I could reach out and people responded. So many people came and some people cried, people were upset, people started to talk, write letters to me. I was really surprised, I didn't know it would have that effect. So art for me became a form of dialogue with the public. So I really take the public and the people that respond to me art very serious. I believe in what Marcel Duchamp said, who said, art is a bipolar product. 50% is the artist and 50% is the onlooker or the public. And he says, that's what's happening between these two poles. Is something like electricity. And I think that comes closest to a good definition of what art is. And from beginning on, I focused on the image of the female child, a girl. So that was the theme, the central theme of all my work all the time. Because I think mankind has one huge problem when it comes to human rights. And that is how women are treated. This is 50% of world population. And women were always discriminated, always oppressed. In many parts of the world, they're still oppressed. In many Islamic countries, they have no rights. But don't forget, even in the Western world, up to 1920, women couldn't vote. I mean, in the 19th century, African-American former slaves could vote if they were male, but not a woman, no matter what color her skin had. A woman was not fit. There was the scientific conviction of men. The brain of women is too small, they're too stupid, they could never be fit to vote or be involved in politics. Thank God at least in part of the Western world, we have overcome that, but I still think women are not appreciated and respected as much as they should. And so this was always something that bothered me and that I thought is a problem that we all have, yeah? Even if we don't look at it, this is a major problem. Mankind suffers from that because there's so much creativity in half of the mankind that's oppressed or limited, you know. And in 1970, the great German artist Gerhard Richter made a famous series called The 48 Portraits. So he picked men with extraordinary achievement in art, in science. And the Ludwig Museum, one of the main museums in Germany, exhibited it. And over years, when I saw it, I always thought it's funny that all these great people with their amazing achievements, they're all men. There's not one woman amongst them. And 20 years later, at the beginning of the 90s, I decided to paint the counterpiece with the 48 portraits, and it's all women. And it's really interesting when I had to choose which women would I take, it was actually hard to scale it down to 48. There's so many amazing women in science, mathematics, physics. The only person that ever got 2 Nobel Prizes was Madame Marie Curie. So it's like enormous amount of writers, artists, and I created a counterpiece. And the original piece of the 48 portraits, the men were all gray and gray, monochromatic. And my piece, I chose the same format, the same technique, just my women were red, fiery red, you know. So, and in 2011, I think, was the first time that both series were actually exhibited in the museum in Prague, facing each other. So it was always, that's why I was happy that Trish asked me to do this series for the museum, because that's something that is really the center of my work anyway. This is what, so I was very happy about it, because the image of the woman is really the center of my expression and my artistic work.
So as you look at this series of paintings that you put together of these Renaissance women who have been depicted in paintings from the Renaissance. My question to you is, then, do you find these women aspirational, uplifting, or how would you describe, as you put this series together? I know you often want to ask the question and have the viewer bring their point of view to it to respond to it. So as you were creating this series, I'm just wondering what you were thinking about when you were painting these, and really such iconic women that if you studied art history, there are women that are forever in your memory, your mind memory.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the Renaissance time was a very special moment in the history of mankind, in the history of the culture of that planet. Because in the Renaissance time, something happened, something changed. And it was the birth of the greatest art that ever existed on this planet in any culture. That in painting, in music, in architecture, in poetry, and it was an explosion of creation. And I was always fascinated by the great masters of the Renaissance, because I think they were aiming for this ideal idea of expressing spirituality. But how can you do that? It's something abstract. It's not material. It's not part of the material universe. So as an artist, you have a vision that is completely immaterial and abstract. So the closest you could come was the portrait of an idealized woman. That's what you see when you look at Leonardo da Vinci and all the other great masters. They always ended up with the face of a woman to express something that's divine, that's the closest to total spirituality. And it's also interesting when you look at old religions, the goddesses, like the divine figures standing for wisdom, was Sophia. It was a woman. Pallas Athenes, she was the goddess for science, for intelligence, for strategy. So the most important parts in the kingdom of the gods were actually in the hands of women. Everything had to do with intelligence, with spirituality, with wisdom, was women. And before the male part of mankind started to dominate, the most ancient cultures before was a matriarchat. That means on top were always women. And I think in the Renaissance time, these great masters were admiring this concept of being feminine, the women, you know. And so that's why I think these portraits have such a deep impact on people emotionally, you know. You can't forget these faces. These faces are, everybody knows them, and they're a highlight of art and Western art. So I think that's why I was so fascinated. That's why I tried to create my own version, mirroring that amazing achievement.
Well, people are very moved when they come in and can experience these spaces. And I think it's their own memory also that they're bringing to the work and the emotion that it evokes. So Trish, talk a little bit about how you came upon the mold that inspired the Faces of Mary.
Oh, that was another stroke of luck. Actually, in 2002, the Vatican granted permission for Mary's face to be molded and taken to a Florida foundry. So how many did they make? They did 25 gold casts for $1 million each. They did 1,000 silver casts for $30,000 each. They did 3,000 bronze casts for $15,000 each. And when I was thinking about doing a new series, I thought, oh, it's going to be the face of Mary. And I asked my assistant, just look online and see if you can find anything for sale of the face of Mary from the Pieta. It was shocking. Somebody had done a mold of that face and done it in marble, and probably their grandma owned it. And they were just selling it on the internet for a couple $1,000s. Like, oh my God, this is too lucky. So I got that and I made a mold of that. And then the first one that I did was I did a glass casting and ground up olivine. It's like a sand. And I took all the fabric off the top of the head, and I did all shells and pearls and, you know, beautiful things for the sea to make her look like a mermaid. Now, I've also done a series with stars. Oh.
Hold on the video, Natalia. Go ahead, Trish. Finish up.
So I've done a series with stars and a series, 2 different series with flowers, and I'm actually doing faces that are going to have different space themes. So go ahead and do the video, and you'll see how I did this one.
The process. Sure. Go ahead now, Natalia.
Studio, TD Glass in St. Pete. And this is my very good friend who helps me create my sculptures, Skye McDonough. And she's going to explain in detail what we do here.
Okay, so we start with a plaster positive of the Madonna figure. And the next step would be to make a silicone mold and a support mother mold behind it, so then we can cast wax into that form. After we make the wax positive of the face, then we can add different elements to create some texture and pattern on the surface. This one has stars, and each star is applied with little tools like this, little wax making tools, and usually using a candle, you'll warm up the tool and melt the wax around each one of these little stars and smooth them all out until it's nice and shiny, and that'll become glass. Once we have the sculpting process finished, adding our little elements, then we take a silicone of that. So if we ever want to reproduce this a second time, we're able to just make it right away. And we don't ever have to start from the scratch again. Okay, she's a little heavy. So this is the finished product after we took a plaster and silica mix mold into the kiln, filled it with glass, and cooked it for about a week. Then we get this beautiful result at the end.
And now I'm going to talk about a different process. It's called sand casting. And I'm a shell collector, so I decided I'm going to put shells and pearls and all sorts of fun things around the face. So I glued all these on, and then actually what you do is you press this into the ground up olivine. It's like a sand.
To get the impression to release, you use an acetylene torch and create a barrier of carbon, and then you ladle glass straight from a furnace into the sand where your impression is of the positive. Once this is pressed into the sand and you have a negative shape, you can wear a mask and use an acetylene torch to create a carbon layer. And then when you cast the hot glass into the stand, it doesn't stick.
The glass is actually ladled at about 2,100 degrees into the empty form that's in the ground up olivine. And then we pick it up after it's torched and cooled down, and we actually have it on a grill, pick it up and put it in the annealer for about 3 to 4 days, so it cools down to room temperature.
And there you go. And that's the technique that you use with your sculpture. So I have another question for you both. That Gottfried, you had said that that your audience is the great love affair of your life, and that you are obsessed with your public, and all I want to do with them is to have your art touch them and move them and to hold them tight. So talk a little bit about the audience. I'm going to ask this question of the both of you, or I'd like both of you to respond. Talk about the audience, what it means, what is it you're trying to communicate, what are the questions that you want them to ask, or what answers you might be providing for them. So Gottfried, you can go first.
Well, I don't anticipate anything. It's like I express whatever is important for me, and then I leave it to the public. Usually there is a delay because in the studio you are pretty much alone. There's no feedback, and it takes a year or years before it ends up in a show in a museum, and then people see it. And this is always a very important moment for me. Like I had a show some years ago in Vienna in the Albertina Museum, and it was a huge success. Like they had 250,000 visitors, which was, fabulous. I think, most visiting artists in that museum. So it was quite a big success. But what's more important, the director of the museum said they have shown every great living artist and contemporary artist and none of them had such an emotional response than my work. That means, he said, for the first time he saw people standing in front of a painting and crying. And that was something I've experienced often in shows, that people get emotionally really touched and shaken. And that's a moment, a very magical moment, because then I know my work has arrived. That moment when I see it touches somebody, it causes emotions and people start to talk, then I know my work arrived, you know. So it was also interesting that very often women actually came to me and started to talk about their own history. And several women told me about times in the past when they were children, they were abused. Some of them have never talked about it, but they told me that the art has shaken them so deeply and triggered all these memories. And one woman told me that she saw my work the first time when she was 14 years old, and she actually started to cry and broke down, and she was surprised why she would so overreact. And then she said memories came up, and she remembered times when she was as a child, when she was abused, and she has completely forgotten it and stored it away. And the pictures that brought it all up, and she said, your work helped me to work my ways through and to face all that. You know? So I'm learning a lot from my public, I must say, from the response. I'm learning a lot also about my own work, you know. So it's really a collaboration with my public, with the people that come to my shows. And it was interesting when I had the first show in an American museum in the San Francisco Fine Arts Museum. I had a studio in LA at the time, and there was a moment when I thought maybe what I'm doing is totally anachronistic. I mean, today in the age of electronics and all the special effects, yeah, virtual realities, who would take the time to stand in front of an oil painting and look at it? I thought maybe the times are over. And also in LA, you get the impression people are superficial and it's like they're so distracted. And I thought maybe the time for painting is over. And in my first show in San Francisco, I was really surprised because I've never gotten so much emotional response than there. Like when I came, people came spontaneously up to me, old people, conservative people, young people, and some of them hugged me and thanked me. I've seen people crying, and a lady said to me, you're probably not aware how important it is that you show your work right here and right now. It's so important. So actually, that's something that keeps me going. After that, I'm really inspired. So I owe all my inspirations to the people. And I learn a lot from them. And I know the next step that I do with my art, you know. So it's as I said, it's a long lasting, lifelong dialogue with the people.
And Trish, not only do you make your own art, but you did open museums. So talk a little bit about audience and what that means for you and the work that you make.
Well, I always am trying to relay a message. And of course, the Pieta means pity or compassion. And I've done another small exhibit on compassion. And compassion is putting yourself in the other person's shoes, seeing how they would be feeling. And this exhibit, featuring Gottfried's stunning large blue paintings, it's just simply magical. And it really does exemplify compassion. And I wanted to read something, a message. And of course, you know, I've done the whole series of vases with the word mother in 24 different languages that's etched into the glass. And I tried to get a glass that matched the color of Gottfried's paintings. But there's something very special about mothers, because we've each had a mother, and mothers are often the ones that teach us about compassion. So I wanted to read something. It's out of this book called Way to Happiness. This is my picture on the cover. And it was something that I want to share with everyone. In all times and in most places, mankind has looked up to and revered certain values. We're talking about compassion now. They are called the virtues. They have been attributed to wise men, holy men, saints, and gods. They have made the difference between a barbarian and a cultured person, the difference between chaos and a decent society. It doesn't absolutely require a heavenly mandate, nor tedious searches through thick books of the philosophers to discover what good is. A self-revelation can occur on the subject. It can be worked out by almost any person. And I think going to this exhibit, you can sit on the bench and you can look and you can think about these things. If one were to think over how he or she would like to be treated by others, one would evolve the human virtues. Just figure out how you would want people to treat you. You would possibly, first of all, want to be treated justly. You wouldn't want people lying about you or falsely or harshly condemning you, right? You would probably want your friends and companions to be loyal. You would not want them to betray you. You could want to be treated with good sportsmanship, not hoodwinked or tricked. You would want people to be fair in their dealings with you. You would want them to be honest with you and not cheat you, correct? You might want to be treated kindly and without cruelty. You would probably want people to be considerate of your rights and feelings. When you were down, you might like others to be compassionate. Instead of blasting you, you would probably want others to exhibit self-control, right? If you had any defects or shortcomings, if you made a mistake, you might want people to be tolerant and not critical. Rather than concentrating on censor and punishment, you would prefer people were forgiving, correct? You might want people to be benevolent toward you, not mean or stingy. Your possible desire would be for others to believe in you, not doubt you at every hand. You would probably prefer to be given respect, not insulted. Possibly you would want others to be polite to you and also treat you with dignity, right? You might like people to admire you. When you did something for them, you would possibly like people to appreciate you, correct? You would probably like others to be friendly toward you. From some, you might want love. And above all, you wouldn't want these people just pretending these things. You would want them to be quite real in their attitudes and to be acting with integrity. So from today on, can you treat all human beings with more compassion, more understanding, and more love instead of hate? It's a good habit to practice. Like works of art that inspire us, let's create lives that are works of art to inspire everyone we come in contact with.
Beautiful, beautiful, thank you.
Good.
And I think that that is a lovely thought to start winding this conversation down a bit. And So Gottfried, I have one last question before we take questions from our audience. So we all have been impacted by this last year, and certainly travel has not occurred. We've been home in our places and not really going out as much as we had before. And I'm just wondering if when you were home this year, did you start working on any new creative projects? And what might those be, and what could we look forward to coming from you? That's a very LA question, you know.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering how you spent the last year.
I've worked a lot. I've worked actually probably more than ever before. So I must say, in the lockdown crisis, I was very privileged. So I was often thinking of all the other people for who this was very hard, you know, for people being confined to a small space, out of work, you can go to work, children can't go to school. So I was thinking of majority of people that lived under horrible circumstances. I personally was really privileged because I live in the countryside. I work in my studio. I have my whole family here. My grandchildren live here, my children, so part of my children. So my life was actually pretty perfect. You know, I could focus on my work. I was not distracted. No restaurants open here in Europe, no coffee shops, so you couldn't go anywhere. And it was actually a good time because I focused on art like never before. And I have right now a show in some of this work is shown in San Francisco in my gallery, Modernism Gallery. Then I have a show in Düsseldorf in Germany and in a museum in Germany. So I have worked on several shows that are all happening right now. And in summer, I will have a show in Venice, in the palace across the right on the Marcos Place. So it's like another great show. And so this 1 year was, for me, it was very good to be locked in my studio and I couldn't go anywhere. It was actually great.
Well, the artist and the timelessness of being locked away in your studio is always a good thing, to be in that creative zone. So Trish, and what's up next for you? I know you have many projects. So what's up next for you?
Well, I have a very exciting project. I'm going to be doing 1,000 lavender goddesses of compassion, like my Buddha wall. I'm going to do 1,000 of them, and I think it's going to be very, very inspirational. I'm just trying to uplift people and educate them, and that's my main purpose, to inspire others. And I wanted to share something too, because about this exhibit, when you think about mothers, and we had opened on Mother's Day, and after raising 8 children, 6 adopted, mostly from birth, I just wanted to give a tribute to all mothers that are out there and any mothers that are listening. And I read a fabulous article that talked about moms who raised 4 kids. They changed more than 20,000 diapers in her lifetime, fed more than 4,000 meals to babies and toddlers, probably told each of you to say please and thank you 1,000 times, and dressed you every morning for several years, put on your pajamas every night as you went to bed. She comforted your hurts, drove you to all your classes and sporting practices. She taught you that you were lovable and loved, and hopefully she taught you to think for yourself and to enjoy life and have some fun. Hopefully she taught you a love of reading and learning new things no matter how old you are. And hopefully she taught you to respect all people regardless of ethnicity, religion, or socioeconomic background. So let's remember to treat others the way that we want to be treated. And of course, the other thing that's coming is the International Museum, and I'm working on that. I'll be up in New York in a couple of weeks, working with architects.
That's and
Great.
myself, I get to be here every day to experience not only all of the exhibits in the museum, but this particular one is right next to my office. So during these times, it is always wonderful. Either I can go and sit in front of the 1,000 Buddhas, or I can come into this gallery and actually commune with all of the feminine spirit that is in this room. So I regard myself as lucky, and what I want to do is to, if anyone has any questions for Trish or for Gottfried, this would be a good time to let us have your questions so we can have Gottfried and Trish answer them. Do we have any questions out there?
I don't know if you can see me, but my name's Haley. I don't see myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I don't
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing about your artwork. Very inspirational. I love the feminine spirit, being a woman myself. And I love that the woman is used as a symbol for things like justice and wisdom. However, I don't know much about art history. And we brought up like the great masters like Leonardo da Vinci and all of these men who drew women as a symbol and as a muse. And I was wondering how many times women were behind the brush portraying themselves as opposed to always through or seemingly mostly through the male gaze.
Yeah, there were actually lots of women, great painters and great artists. The problem was that in the past they were not allowed to be artists. They were not, I mean, up to the 20th century, but in many countries, most countries, not allowed to study university. They were in England at the time in the 19th century when women could study medicine, but they could not get a doctorate because they were women. So there were lots of amazing creative artists in the past, great paintresses actually, and but it was very tough against the conventions and the laws to have a successful career. But some women did it actually, yeah? And so I think that's a great tragedy because so much creation was oppressed, unfortunately.
And can I say, it's the same thing in glass art. And like the Italians wouldn't even allow women into the studios. So it wasn't until the Americans started doing glass in the 1960s that women such as Tuzinski and others started creating glass sculptures. So it's an amazing new American field, this field of glass art. You know, before it was just cups and glasses and different things like that made in Italy. But the American women are the ones that have brought this to the fore. And they are artists that are leading the way. And if you visited Imagine Museum, you will see a lot of women artists that I feature. In fact, I have one whole room that is all women artists. So I think it's an exciting breakthrough. And that's why I did the museum. One of the reasons I did this museum was to help make the American artists famous, because we all know Chihuly, but we don't know the names of many, many of the other artists. So once you come to the Imagine Museum, you can see how many women there are that are getting into this field. And it is a new field. So it's thrilling that so many women are involved.
Awesome, thank you. I spent my birthday actually at the Imagine Museum this year. It was wonderful. I need to pay better attention to artist names and do my research. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Great.
For the question.
We have another question from Facebook, from Zach Anderson. What advice would you give to the artists starting out, especially in terms of getting shows and exhibits?
I think the internet is actually a great advantage now, because before you were really dependent on a gallery, and there's so many artists and very few good galleries, and so it's very hard to, if you're dependent. But right now through the internet, I think there is a chance that you can reach your public directly. And I know many artists actually started to show their art on Instagram constantly, and gained a great audience. Lots of people start buying the art. So the great thing, there's one good thing about this internet, that you're not dependent so much anymore. So I would suggest an artist, the most important thing is if you start, just keep creating and working and show your work. Like you can show it to the world by putting it on Instagram, on Facebook, and just keep showing it. And people will respond. And more and more people now buy over the internet. So you might get people who start to collect your art, who buy your art, you know. So it gives you a great deal of independence, actually. And this is the best way to start. And then you might get the attention of an art dealer or a gallery, and then you can also exhibit in a gallery. But the great thing is you're not completely dependent on that anymore.
And one other thing I'd like to say about the US is that we have art fairs all over. They were shut down for the pandemic. But of course, there's Corey Hampson, I know of Habitat Gallery, is doing a whole series of art fairs this year. There's supposed to be huge ones in January, Palm Beach and different places. And I know my mentor, Marlena Rose, she actually started in art fairs. So you get up early, you're there at 5 o'clock in the morning, you show your paintings or your glass all day, 2 days in a row or 3 days in a row, and you start building up a clientele. And Marlena has a huge following now just from all the art fairs that she's gone to, and now is in galleries, and you know she's one of the artists that Corey Hampson at Habitat Gallery has taken up, and she's just done a spectacular job. So it's a lot of hard work and being as ethical as you can, really producing and creating.
Absolutely. So Trish, there was a question, where will the International be located?
That's a good question, and I can't answer that right now. I have actually 4 different locations that are available to me. So, and I have not made that decision yet.
Very good, very good. So are there any other questions out there, Natalia?
No, I don't see any question on Facebook. A lot of compliments. Everybody seemed to be really enjoying the Facebook stream.
Wonderful.
So everybody grateful.
Good. So any final comments from Trish or from Gottfried?
May I just briefly interrupt, if you don't mind? This is Peter Bremmers from the Netherlands. Greetings. Very happy to see you both and to hear this absolutely wonderful talk. But I must say that I'm really excited to see your collaboration. I think the collaboration is a really huge success. So congratulations to both of you. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Peter is our artist of the future, and he has a very spectacular show going on at the museum at the same time that people are really, really enjoying. And Peter, by the way, Gottfried is he was supposed to come back here last year, but we had the pandemic, and he's gonna be working in my glass gallery. So I think we're gonna see some pretty exciting and creative pieces of glass by Gottfried in this next year when he gets over here. We're waiting for him.
In October, I want to come. Yeah?
We're waiting.
Very cool.
Too. So I can't wait till travel actually starts international travel starts happening again, because we do want to have Gottfried in so he can meet the audience here at Imagine Museum, as well as Peter also, just that people can see the humanity of both of these gentlemen and how they communicate through their artwork. I will say, and this is for both exhibitions, that you can see these exhibits. We're open from Tuesday through Sunday. And on Wednesdays and Fridays at 3 p.m., we do have free guided tours that will take you, we have tour guides that will take you through these exhibits to go into a little bit more deeper dive about the artists and about the work that they're seeing. So there is some context for our viewers during this year when we are imagining the world. I also want to thank everyone who has joined us on Facebook and through Zoom for joining us today. If you wanted any more information, please go to our website at imaginemuseum.com. I encourage everyone to visit our online store for that one-of-a-kind glass item. And please, if you can, make it to the museum in person. This is just a lovely time to come in, to be able to have some space between you and the other visitors to really spend some time with the works that are here. We also are offering some membership opportunities. So if your membership is getting close to expiring, this is a good time to renew. And with your renewal, we'll give you some free passes for you to bring some of your friends into the museum. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Gottfried, it was simply a delight. It's such a pleasure to have you here in the museum and to have this body of work represented. Trish, it's always a pleasure to see you and to hear you talk about your work. If there's not any other questions, then I can say good afternoon to all of you and look forward to seeing you all again here in person at the museum. Thank you so long.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you.